by the way, Tony? Do I have to tell him my name?
You might want to refresh your memory.
But, however, I do want to tell you that my name is Frank. Last name is Pasqualetto. Tony, you really destroyed my last name when you announced it on the...
I did. Pasqualetto.
Yes, Pasqualetto. P-A-S-Q-U-A-L-E-W-T-O. And
Last one to let you know.
when I was in sales, that name made me a lot of money. The reason for that, of course, I was able to tell the public, you know, feel free to call me Frank. I know that last name is a tongue twister, and so I was able to build a good rapport with families. I come from east of Boston, Massachusetts. There is such a thing as a city known as East Boston. But I don't recall it because I was a little tot when my parents moved out of there. So, for all intents and purposes, I really consider a city called Medford, Mass. as my home. That's where I got all my education. That's where I stood most of my time. And by the way, I only spent 20 years there because the rest of the time I was out here in California. So I had my teenage and my services was during that time. My parents, they both came from Italy. They too were a matched up marriage, with the exception that my dad had the choice between a few gals, and he chose my mother. He said, no, I want this one, and this is the one he got. My dad was quite a gentleman. He was extremely proud to be an American when he came here. Extremely. He was not much of an educator. However, he did self-educate himself. He was a book reader. He read Italian books. When he learned English, he read the English language too. He came here knowing two words. Hello and goodbye. That's all he had. However, it didn't take him long to fill in that gap. He was an ambitious individual, self-employed individual, never worked a day, as my mother would say, for anyone. He just simply came to this country, took advantage of the many opportunities, and he raised 5 children, a wife. We didn't have a dog or a cat, and me, I was the youngest of the family. Now, my reputation as being the youngest was, he's a spoiled one. I was the spoiled one. Well, yeah, there was a big gap between my brothers and me. And yeah, my parents probably did spoil me somewhat. Yeah, I did scream when I wanted certain things. Yeah, I was a lover of clothes. That was a big item with me. I had to have a new outfit Christmas time. I had to have a new outfit Easter time. Of course, my mother put her foot down. She says, I don't believe you should have an outfit for Groundhog's Day. I don't understand that. You can have it maybe this, but not that. I was taught, and one of my love for life, and I'll remind me to tell you how I met my wife. I'd like to dance. I did a lot of dancing in my young days. I did a lot of school dancing during that time. And my brother taught me how to dance, my oldest brother. My brother taught me how to dress, my oldest brother. He was a shop dresser, and he was also a heck of a dancer. He used to entertain troops when he was in the Air Force. He knew how to swing. He knew how to pick up a gal, toss her around, and catch her at the same time. Sometimes he missed her, but by and large he did. My brother was probably that tall. He didn't weigh more than about 125, 30 pounds, very small. In fact, they made him a ray gunner and a B-52. They stuffed him in there because he was small enough to be behind the enemy. But he found out, he didn't like that. He found out, you know, that's not the place to be. So he decided to go into dancing a little more, and they made him dance for the troops. And so he did a great job. I want to get back to my dad because I really, really adore that man. He not only was my father, he became my friend. Very close, extremely close. The man never worked for a day in the life, as I mentioned. My mother used to comment about that, but the man had desire, drive, ambition, and he knew he had to raise a big family like that. How does he go about it? Well, he did it by profit. He knew if he bought something for X amount of dollars, if he sold it, more money, he'd get a profit in between. He made money that way. He operated businesses, real estate, and here's a man who's just had two words, hello and goodbye. He learned in between. He owned businesses. He didn't care whether he lasted, whether they were, if he bought a house today and Forrest came along and said, I'll give you X amount of dollars, and he saw there was money in between, I'll take it. I'll take it. That's because he couldn't afford to wait. He had to have it now. He had to feed his family. That's why I had mentioned to you I didn't live in East Boston. Actually, he was too busy moving us from one house to another house, to another house, and to another house. All because he sold it for a profit. One particular house that I loved the most was a huge colonial New England style home. 2-story attic and a cellar. You don't move back there unless you have a cellar. And if you're especially Italian, you don't go in a house unless you have a cellar. That's where he's going to make his vino. That's where he's going to make his wine. That is his. I want to talk about that for an example. And Phyllis, you'll appreciate this. And he would love you, because if you love drinking wine and you love his wine, you'll be his friend for the rest of it. That's it. He used to make wine, and he used to give it to me, because I'm his son. I'm his favorite son, perhaps. I want you to have my wine. It's good stuff. It's the best. Of course, it was a borderline wine and brandy. You sniffed a little of that, and you know you drank wine. And I wouldn't take it. I wouldn't take it because I really didn't care for wine at that time. He felt real bad because they take great pride when you get a good stock of wine. If he gives you or offers you that wine, it's very, very complimentary. It is, you're top of the list. So I was top of his list. And he wanted me to drink his wine. I said, Dad, I just don't want that wine. I'm not into wine. Well, I'm going to go ahead in my story. Way back, one day, when of course he had passed away, and this was quite a few years later, the wife and I had gone to a fine dining restaurant. We sat down. The very first thing, the waitress says, what would you like to drink? I said, I'll have a glass of Cabernet. After she brought it, my wife said to me, what the heck are you doing drinking wine? This is the first time you've ever ordered wine. I said, I don't know what possessed me to say it, but I did. I just don't know. I drank it, and guess what? I had another one. Loved it. My mother was alive at that time, and I went home and told her what happened. You know what she said? Your dad's still working on you to drink wine. Your dad is still working on you to drink wine. I've been drinking wine ever since. I want to talk to you a little bit about how I met my wife. I think it's an interesting thing. I was a dancer. I was going to a high school dance. That was most of our entertainment. And I loved dancing. And I saw a group of gals, one in particular I wanted to dance with. I thought I made eye contact with her. As I eye contact her, I was at a distance, and the music started. I simply gave it this number. In the meantime, the group of gals that were there, my wife was among them, or my wife-to-be. They knew she had somewhat of a crush on me. They pushed her out front. Now, my going there, and she's reluctantly walking. I'm a gentleman. Gentlemen don't refuse it, so I went halfway and took her by her hand, and we went ahead and danced. She was like that. This
You do
poor
that to
gal,
women.
this was a
I'm not
soft,
that way too around here.
Animal magnet.
this was a soft number, one that you hold, one you dance. And she gave me this. I never saw her face. I saw the top of her head because she didn't want to look up and talk. She didn't want to have. She was just scared. I met her that way, and from that day on, one thing led to another. We sort of gone together for 5 years before we decided to tie the knot. And I tell you the reason why we tied the knot, and I'll be honest with you, is that Uncle Sam one day asked me to join them in the service. And I said, do I have a choice? They said no. So I said, okay. We put to Devon's and I went. Then they also asked me to go overseas to Korea. I said, no, I don't care to. They said, well, okay, your embarkation will be at a certain date. You'll be there. Well, what happened was that at that period of time, if you get married, Uncle Sam will pay half of your salary if you send half of your salary home. They will match it. Wow, that's pretty good. It pays to go ahead and get married and have her. I'm going to be spending 16 months in Korea anyway, so I had no choice. So I said, fine, I'll do that. The only problem is, my dad came out of the woodwork and he wanted me to have an elaborate, and I mean elaborate wedding. I only had an
With wine.
I'll tell you a story with him too. So we did. We didn't have a choice. I mean, we had, what we had, you know how you say a bar is open? No, he didn't want that. He wanted the bar to come to the table. Instead of the people go to the bar, we had a bar at the table. And that was an interesting point. I had to have a bottle of VO or a bottle of Seagram 7 and a table of 8, plus white wine, red wine. It cost me an arm and a leg. But you remember The Godfather? You remember that woman that walked around and they got La Bouche to in here? That means they put the envelope? Thank goodness for that envelope. Lord have mercy. Thank goodness. Almost to the dime. What it cost me, almost to the dime, I received back. That's because my dad had a tremendous amount of friends, and they honored him. Now, my dad was the godfather of his family. Nothing, and he never smoked a big cigar like a mafioso. No, he was just he was the guy that they go to, what do you think? He was the guy they go to, how much money can I borrow? What do you, he loaned somebody some money one time. This is an interesting story he told me about. He had a cousin that says, I need $100. Now remember, back in those days, $100, it's got to be over 10 grand today, or something like that. He says, sure, by all means. My dad would give him the $100 and, whenever you got a chance, pay me back. Well, this gentleman never paid him back. 2 weeks, 3 weeks went by, 4 weeks. Finally, he comes back and he says, Frank, they call my dad Frank, by the way. His name is not really Frank, it's Mateo. And they called, he says, can I borrow some money? He says, sure. He says, right over there. He says, see that desk over there? The left-hand side, there's a drawer right there. Open that drawer and you'll find some money in there. Help yourself. See what you need. The guy went over there, looked up the drawer, looked in there. He says, Frank, he says, it's empty. It would have been $100 richer in there had you gave me back that $100. I would have found that $100 in there. He took a hint. It took him another 2 or 3 weeks, he said, and he gave me back the money. Then he said, I'll loan him some more whenever he needed it. I think I've told you enough about my dad, even though I think he's my mentor.
Tell us about Forest Lawn, where you were.